Did you even know what you got yourself into?
The clock on the microwave glowed 2:17 a.m. when I heard Jenna's BMW purr into our driveway. I'd been sitting in the kitchen for the past hour, nursing my third cup of coffee and staring at the credit card statement I'd found tucked behind her jewelry box. $2,000 at Ocean View Beach House Rentals. Funny thing was, we hadn't taken any family vacations lately. The front door opened with that particular careful quietness of someone trying not to wake a sleeping household. Jenna's heels clicked softly against the hardwood as she made her way toward the kitchen, probably hoping to grab some water and slip upstairs unnoticed. She froze when she saw me sitting at the breakfast bar, still fully dressed at this ungodly hour. "Alec, what are you doing up?" Her voice carried that slightly guilty tone I'd been hearing more often lately. She looked stunning, even disheveled from whatever client dinner had kept her out until after 2. Her auburn hair was mussed, lipstick mostly gone, and her expensive blazer was wrinkled in interesting places. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd practice. Practice what? She moved to the coffee maker, her back to me now. Even in the dim kitchen lighting, I could see the tension in her shoulders. Practicing for when you're gone. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers like I'd slapped her. It shattered against the tile floor, sending ceramic shards and coffee dregs across the kitchen. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet house. "Jesus, Alec! What's that supposed to mean?" She spun around, her green eyes flashing with something between anger and fear. "Why are you being so cold lately?" I stood up slowly, stepping around the broken ceramic. "Cold? That's interesting, coming from someone who's been working late every night for the past 3 months." I held up the credit card statement. "Tell me about Ocean View Beach House Rentals, Jenna." Her face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny everything, but something in my expression must have told her I was past the point of buying her lies. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "Really? Then explain it to me. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my wife of 12 years has been renting romantic getaways without her husband." Jenna's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The woman who could sell ice to Eskimos, who'd climbed the corporate ladder at Rivermouth Creative by never being at a loss for words, suddenly had nothing to say. That's when I knew for certain. All those late nights, all those weekend emergency meetings, all those times she'd come home smelling like cologne I didn't recognize. It wasn't just my paranoid imagination. "I need some air," she said finally, grabbing her purse from the counter. "Running away? That's your solution." She paused at the kitchen doorway. "I'm not running anywhere, Alec. This is my house, too." "For now," I said quietly, after she left, probably to her sister Maya's place, where she'd been spending a suspicious amount of time lately. I sat back down at the breakfast bar and pulled out my phone. Frank Kowalski answered on the third ring. "Do you know what time it is, Moreland?" "I need a favor, Frank." There was a pause. Frank had been my best friend since college, and he'd spent 15 years as a cop before starting his own private investigation business. He knew that tone in my voice. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that requires your particular skill set." "Ah, heck. She's cheating, isn't she?" I stared at the broken coffee cup on the floor. "I need proof." "You sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes it's better not to know." "I already know, Frank. I just need evidence." "All right, meet me at the shop tomorrow morning. We'll talk." After I hung up, I swept up the ceramic pieces and mopped the coffee stains. As I worked, I kept thinking about that moment when the cup slipped from Jenna's fingers. The look of genuine fear in her eyes when I'd said I was practicing for when she was gone. She should be afraid. Because Alec Moreland, the guy everyone underestimated, the former advertising executive who'd been content to run a small print shop and raise his kids, was done being the fool. I was done practicing. The real game was about to begin. Moreland's custom print solutions occupied the ground floor of an old textile mill that had been converted into small business spaces. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me the flexibility to be home when the kids got out of school. At least, it had before Jenna started her extracurricular activities. Eddie Torino was already at work when I arrived the next morning, running the large format printer that was our bread and butter. Eddie had worked for me for 5 years, and in that time, he'd proven himself to be both an excellent employee and an incurable gossip. In a town the size of Rivermouth, that combination made him better than the local newspaper for keeping track of what was happening. "Boss, you look like heck," Eddie said without looking up from the banner he was printing for the Chamber of Commerce. "Rough night." "You could say that." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot Eddie always had brewing. "Hey, Eddie, you mentioned seeing Jenna down by the marina last week. What exactly did you see?" Eddie's hands stilled on the printer controls. He turned to look at me with the expression of a man who suddenly realized he might have stepped in something unpleasant. Boss, I don't know if I should—" "Eddie," I kept my voice level, but something in my tone made him straighten up. "What did you see?" He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "She was coming out of that fancy seafood place on Wharf Street. You know, the one where they charge $30 for fish and chips? She was with some guy in an expensive suit, tall, dark hair, looked like he spent more on his haircut than I make in a week." "Did you recognize him?" "Never seen him before, but he was driving a black BMW with vanity plates. Something like Clay Hut or Clay T. I couldn't see it clearly from where I was parked. Clay, the name hit me like a punch to the gut. Clay Harlan, the CEO of Rivermouth Creative, Jenna's company. I'd met him at a few office parties over the years. Smooth, confident, the kind of guy who wore $1,000 suits and talked about his weekend sailing trips. They seemed pretty cozy," Eddie continued reluctantly. "Real touchy-feely, if you know what I mean. I figured maybe it was just a business dinner that got a little friendly, but what? Well, I saw them again 2 nights ago. Same restaurant, but this time they went for a walk on the pier afterward. Boss, I ain't trying to cause trouble, but they were holding hands." I set my coffee cup down carefully, afraid I might crush it in my grip. "Thanks for telling me, Eddie. You want me to keep an eye out? I drive past the marina every night on my way home." "No, but I appreciate the offer." Frank showed up around 10, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd put on weight since leaving the force, but he still carried himself like a cop. His graying hair was buzz-cut short, and his weathered face bore the skeptical expression of a man who'd seen too much of humanity's darker side. "So," he said without preamble, "you want to tell me what's really going on?" I filled him in on everything. The late nights, the credit card statement, Eddie's sightings, the confrontation with Jenna. Frank listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making notes in a small notebook he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. "Clay Harlan," he said when I finished. "I know that name. His company's been in the news lately, some kind of contract dispute with the city over the tourism campaign." "What kind of dispute?" "The kind that involves accusations of bid rigging and inside information. Nothing proven, but there's been talk." Frank closed his notebook and looked at me seriously. "Alec, if your wife is involved with this guy, it might be more complicated than just an affair." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Jenna works for his company. She's got access to client information, financial records, strategic plans. If Harlan's running some kind of side business using company resources, she could be helping him without even knowing it. Or she could be in it up to her neck." Frank stood up and tucked the notebook back into his jacket. "Either way, you're going to need more than Eddie's eyewitness testimony if you want to protect yourself in a divorce. What are you thinking? Surveillance, photos, audio recordings, documentation of where they go and what they do. But, Alec..." He paused at the door. "Once we start down this road, there's no going back. You sure you're ready for whatever we might find?" I thought about Jenna's face when that coffee cup slipped from her fingers. The fear in her eyes when she realized I was onto her. "I'm ready." "All right then. Tonight, we start watching." After Frank left, I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd missed or ignored. The new clothes, the sudden interest in working out, the way she'd started password protecting her phone. How long had I been the oblivious husband, while my wife carried on with her boss? Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "Sorry about last night. Can we talk when I get home?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Sure, we should definitely talk." But I wasn't planning on having the conversation she expected. By the time Jenna got home tonight, Frank and I would be watching from the shadows, documenting every move she made. The game had officially begun. Frank picked me up at 7:30 in his nondescript gray sedan, the kind of car that became invisible in traffic. He'd traded his usual jeans and flannel for dark clothing, and had a camera bag in the back seat that looked expensive and professional. "She left yet?" he asked as I climbed into the passenger seat. 20 minutes ago. Told me she had to go back to the office to finish a presentation for tomorrow's client meeting." "And you believe that?" "About as much as I believe in the Easter Bunny." I handed him a thermos of coffee. "Eddie called. He's parked near the marina and says Harlan's BMW is already at the restaurant." Frank nodded grimly. "Then that's where we start." The Wharf Street Grill sat at the end of Rivermouth's small downtown marina, a converted warehouse that had been turned into an upscale restaurant. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, we could see couples dining by candlelight, the kind of romantic atmosphere that would have cost me a week's salary back when Jenna and I still did things like celebrate anniversaries. We parked across the street behind a delivery van that gave us a clear view of the restaurant's entrance. Frank assembled his camera with practiced efficiency, a telephoto lens that looked like it could photograph the moon. "There," I said, pointing to a black BMW parked in the restaurant's small lot. The vanity plate read, Clay H1. "Subtle," Frank muttered, adjusting his camera settings. "How long have they been in there?" Eddie said about an hour. We didn't have to wait long. At 8:15, the restaurant door opened and Jenna emerged, followed by a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit. Even from across the street, I could see her laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that was far too intimate for a business dinner. Clay Harlan was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average height, athletic where I'd developed a slight paunch, confident where I preferred to stay in the background. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and even from a distance, I could see the gleam of expensive jewelry. "That him?" Frank asked, already taking pictures. "That's him." Frank's camera clicked rapidly as Clay and Jenna walked toward his car. But instead of getting in, they turned toward the marina's wooden walkway that extended out over the water. "They're going for a walk," I said unnecessarily. "Good. Easier to photograph in the open." We followed at a distance, staying in the shadows between the marina's buildings. The walkway was lit by old-fashioned lampposts that created pools of yellow light separated by stretches of darkness. Clay and Jenna walked slowly, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward his shoulder. They stopped at the end of the pier, where a small pavilion provided a romantic view of the harbor. Frank crouched behind a stack of lobster traps and continued photographing while I watched my marriage dissolve in real time. Clay pulled Jenna close and kissed her. Not the quick peck of a business associate, but the deep, passionate kiss of lovers. Jenna's arms went around his neck, her body pressed against his like they were the only two people in the world. "Jesus," Frank whispered. "I'm sorry, man." I felt strangely detached, like I was watching a movie instead of my wife betraying 12 years of marriage. Maybe it was shock, or maybe I'd already grieved the death of my marriage during all those lonely nights when she'd been working late. "Keep shooting," I said quietly. They talked for another 10 minutes, their conversation too quiet for us to overhear from our hiding spot. Then Clay's phone rang. He answered it with obvious irritation, his voice carrying across the water. "What do you mean the Riverside project files are missing?" "No. I specifically told you to keep those locked up." "Damn it, Maya. This is exactly the kind of screw-up we can't afford right now." Maya, Jenna's sister and best friend, who worked in HR at Rivermouth Creative. The same Maya whose house Jenna claimed to be visiting during her mysterious absences. The phone call ended Clay's romantic mood. He said something to Jenna that made her face tighten with concern, then walked her back to her car. They exchanged another kiss before she drove away, but this one was quick and distracted. "Interesting," Frank said, lowering his camera. "Sounds like there's trouble in paradise. Did you get everything?" "Enough to prove she's cheating, if that's what you're after." "But that phone call." Frank frowned thoughtfully. "Project files going missing, keeping things locked up. That doesn't sound like normal business operations." We followed Clay back to his BMW, watching as he made another phone call before driving away. Frank took pictures of his license plate and made notes about the time and location. "What's our next move?" I asked as we walked back to Frank's car. "We dig deeper. I've got a contact at City Hall who owes me a favor. I'll see what I can find out about this Riverside project and any contracts between the city and Rivermouth Creative." "And Jenna?" Frank's expression was grim. "We keep watching. If she's just having an affair, that's one thing. But if she's involved in whatever Harlan's got going on the side, she could be in serious trouble. Or she could be the one causing it." The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When Frank dropped me off, the house was dark except for the porch light Jenna had left on. Her BMW was in the driveway, and I could see the faint glow of the television through the living room curtains. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, staring at the house where I'd lived for 8 years, where my children slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that their world was about to change forever. When I finally went inside, Jenna was curled up on the couch in her pajamas, watching the late news. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. "How was your presentation?" I asked. "Fine, long, but productive." She muted the television. "Where were you? I tried calling around 9. Had a beer with Frank. Lost track of time." She nodded, but I could see her studying my face, looking for signs that I suspected something. If only she knew that I'd spent the evening watching her make out with her boss on the marina pier. "Alec," she said softly, "about last night. I think we should talk." "Tomorrow," I said. "I'm tired." As I headed upstairs, I heard her call after me. "I love you." The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 hours ago, she'd been in another man's arms, and now she was telling me she loved me. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. "Good night, Jenna," I said without turning around. In the bedroom, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to her come upstairs an hour later. She slipped into bed beside me, and I felt her hand touch my shoulder tentatively. "Are you awake?" I kept my breathing steady and didn't respond. After a few minutes, she rolled over and went to sleep. But I stayed awake, planning my next move, because tomorrow, the real work would begin. The next morning, I woke up to find Jenna already gone. A note on the kitchen counter explained that she had an early meeting with a potential client, but would be home for dinner. She'd signed it with a heart, like we were still the happy couple we'd pretended to be for the past few months. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when Frank called. "We need to meet," he said without preamble. "I found something. Good something or bad something. Depends on your perspective. Can you get away from the shop for an hour? Give me 30 minutes. We met at Murphy's Diner, a greasy spoon downtown that served terrible coffee and excellent gossip. Frank was already in a corner booth when I arrived. A manila folder spread out in front of him. "My contact at City Hall came through," he said, as I slid into the seat across from him. "The Riverside project is a big deal, $20 million in tourism development funding. Rivermouth Creative was awarded the marketing contract last month. That's good news for Jenna's company, right?" It would be, except there were irregularities in the bidding process. 3 other agencies submitted proposals, and all of them were significantly underbid by Rivermouth Creative, like suspiciously underbid. Frank pulled out a sheet of paper covered in numbers. The closest competitor bid came in at $1.2 million. Rivermouth Creative's winning bid was $800,000. Maybe they're just more efficient, or maybe they had inside information about what the other companies were bidding. Frank's expression was serious. "Alec, if someone at Rivermouth Creative had access to the sealed bids before they were opened, that's fraud. Big-time fraud. Federal investigation, prison time, kind of fraud." I stared at the numbers on Frank's sheet, trying to process what this meant. "You think Clay's involved?" "I think Clay's up to his neck in it. And if Jenna's helping him, she could go down with him." I felt sick. Whatever problems Jenna and I had, she was still the mother of my children. The thought of her in prison was almost worse than the thought of her with another man. "There's more," Frank said grimly. He pulled out a photograph, a surveillance shot of Clay and Jenna at the Marina restaurant. "I had this enhanced by a guy I know. Look at what's on the table." I squinted at the photo. Between the wine glasses and appetizer plates, I could make out what looked like a manila envelope. "Documents," Frank said. "She's passing him something, and from the way they're both looking at it, it's not a love letter." Jesus. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" I sat back in the booth, my mind racing. A week ago, my biggest worry was whether the kids were doing their homework. Now I was sitting in a diner discussing federal fraud charges and my wife's potential criminal activity. "I need proof," I said finally. "Real proof, not just speculation." "What kind of proof?" "The kind that would hold up in court, photos, documents, recordings, whatever it takes." Frank studied my face carefully. "Alec, if we go down this road, there's no coming back. Once we start gathering evidence of criminal activity, we're going to have to turn it over to the authorities." "I understand. Because we're not just talking about divorce proceedings anymore. We're talking about your wife potentially going to federal prison." I thought about Jenna's face when she'd told me she loved me last night, the casual way she'd lied to me about working late, the months of deception and betrayal. She made her choice, I said quietly. Now I'm making mine. Frank nodded slowly. All right then, but we're going to need help. This is bigger than a simple adultery case. What kind of help? The kind that involves the FBI. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a sterile conference room in the federal building in Portland, facing Special Agent Sarah Chen and her partner, Agent Mike Torres. Frank had called in a favor with a former colleague who'd gone federal, and within an hour, we'd been fast-tracked to the white-collar crime division. Agent Chen was a small, intense woman in her 30s who took notes in a precise handwriting that looked like computer font. Agent Torres was older, with graying temples and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent years untangling complex financial crimes. Moreland, Agent Chen said after I'd finished explaining the situation, you understand that if we pursue this investigation, your wife could face serious federal charges. I understand. And you're willing to cooperate fully with our investigation, even if it means testifying against your wife? The question hung in the air like a loaded tool. This was the moment of no return. The point where I either committed fully to destroying Jenna's life or walked away and pretended I'd never seen her in Clay Harlan's arms. Yes, I said, I'm willing to cooperate. Agent Torres leaned forward. We've been looking at Rivermouth Creative for several months. There have been irregularities in multiple city contracts, not just the Riverside project. If your wife has access to confidential bidding information, she's the senior account manager, I said. She has access to everything. Then she could be invaluable to our investigation, Agent Chen said. But we'll need evidence of her direct involvement before we can move forward. What kind of evidence? Documents, recordings, proof that she's actively participating in the fraud rather than just being manipulated by Harlan. Frank spoke up for the first time since we'd entered the room. We can get that, but we'll need some assurances about protection for Mr. Moreland and his children. If Mr. Moreland cooperates fully with our investigation, we'll make sure he's protected, Agent Torres said. But he needs to understand that this is a long-term commitment. We're talking about months of surveillance, possibly wearing a wire, documenting every interaction with his wife. I thought about my kids, sleeping peacefully in their beds while their mother plotted with her lover. They deserved better than parents who lied and cheated and broke federal laws. What do you need me to do? Agent Chen smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. We need you to go home and act like nothing has changed. Can you do that? I've been doing it for months. Good. We'll be in touch within 24 hours with specific instructions. In the meantime, document everything, every conversation, every late night, every suspicious behavior. And Mr. Moreland? Yes? Don't let your wife suspect anything. If she realizes we're onto her, she could destroy evidence or flee. We need her to feel safe and confident. As Frank and I left the federal building, I felt like I was walking in a dream. 12 hours ago, I'd been a small business owner with a cheating wife. Now I was a federal informant in a white-collar crime investigation. You okay? Frank asked as we reached his car. Ask me in 6 months. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. I looked back at the imposing federal building behind us. I hope my kids see it that way when this is all over. The drive back to Rivermouth was quiet, both of us lost in thought. When Frank dropped me off at the print shop, he gripped my shoulder. Remember, from now on, everything you do is being watched. Don't give them any reason to doubt your commitment. I won't. That evening, I went home to my wife and children like nothing had changed. I helped with homework, made dinner, and listened to Jenna talk about her day at work. She seemed relaxed, almost cheerful, probably because she thought her secret was still safe. If only she knew that her husband had just signed her death warrant. 3 days later, I was back in the federal building, this time being fitted with a recording device that looked like something out of a spy movie. The wire was smaller than I'd expected. A tiny microphone that attached to my chest with medical tape, connected to a digital recorder the size of a matchbook that clipped to my belt. The battery life is about 8 hours, Agent Chen explained, as a technician made final adjustments to the equipment. The range is roughly 50 feet, so as long as you're in the same room as your wife, we'll pick up everything. What if she finds it? She won't. As long as you act natural. The microphone is virtually invisible under clothing, and the recorder looks like a pager or phone charger. Agent Torres handed me a small instruction sheet. Activation is simple. Just press and hold this button for 3 seconds. A small LED will flash once to confirm its recording. To stop recording, press and hold again. I practiced the procedure several times until it became automatic. The weight of the equipment felt strange against my body, a constant reminder of what I was doing. Remember, Agent Chen said as I prepared to leave, we need her to incriminate herself. Don't lead her into saying anything. Let her talk naturally about her work, her relationship with Harlan, anything related to the contracts. What if she doesn't say anything useful? She will. People who are committing crimes can't help but talk about them, especially to someone they trust. And she still trusts you. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jenna trusted me enough to lie to my face every day while I was secretly recording her every word for the FBI. That evening, I activated the wire before Jenna got home from work. She arrived at 6:30, looking tired and stressed, a marked change from the cheerful mood she'd been in earlier in the week. Rough day? I asked as she dropped her purse on the kitchen counter. You could say that. She poured herself a glass of wine, something she'd been doing more often lately. There's some drama at work, missing files, questions about the Riverside contract. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice casual. What kind of questions? Oh, you know how it is with big contracts. Everyone wants to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. She took a long sip of wine. Clay's handling it, but it's got everyone on edge. Clay Harlan? Your boss? Something flickered across her face. Guilt, fear, I couldn't tell which. Yeah, he's been working overtime to make sure everything's perfect. Sounds stressful for him. It is. We had dinner last night to go over some of the details. She said it casually, like it was perfectly normal for her to have dinner with her boss. He's really carrying a lot of weight on this project. I felt the wires recorder against my belt, capturing every word. Must be nice, having a boss who values your input so much. Clay and I work well together. He trusts my judgment on client relations. Is that all he trusts you with? The question came out sharper than I'd intended. Jenna looked at me with surprise, then something that might have been suspicion. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, just seems like you two spend a lot of time together lately. It's a big contract, Alec, $20 million. Of course we're spending time together. She finished her wine and headed upstairs, effectively ending the conversation. I waited until I heard the shower running, then turned off the recorder and called the number Agent Chen had given me. How did it go? She asked. She admitted to having dinner with Harlan last night, and she mentioned something about missing files and questions about the Riverside contract. Good. That's a start. Keep pushing, but gently. We need her to feel comfortable talking about work. Over the next week, I became an expert at casual interrogation. I asked about her projects, her coworkers, her late nights at the office. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a woman who was in deeper than I'd ever imagined. Jenna talked about Clay like he was a brilliant strategist, someone who could see opportunities that others missed. She mentioned meetings with city officials that weren't on any public calendar, and conversations about competitive advantages that sounded suspiciously like inside information. But it was the recording from Friday night that changed everything. Jenna had been drinking more than usual. 3 glasses of wine with dinner, and her guard was down. When I asked about her weekend plans, she laughed bitterly. Clay wants to meet tomorrow to go over the Morrison Industries proposal. Can you believe they're bidding against us again? Morrison Industries? They've been undercutting us on every major contract for the past year. Clay thinks they have someone feeding them information about our bids. The irony was staggering. Clay was accusing his competitors of exactly what he was doing. That must be frustrating. I said, it was until Clay figured out how to level the playing field. Jenna's voice had taken on a conspiratorial tone. Let's just say we have our own sources of information now. What kind of sources? The kind that makes sure we know exactly what we're up against before we submit our bids. She said it with the casual confidence of someone who thought she was talking to an ally. I felt sick as I realized that my wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was actively participating in a criminal conspiracy. Sounds like Clay's got it all figured out, I managed. He's brilliant. He sees angles that other people miss. That's why Rivermouth Creative has been so successful lately. And that's why you've been working so closely with him, among other reasons. She gave me a look that was almost flirtatious. Clay appreciates my talents in ways that some people don't. The dig was clearly aimed at me, but all I felt was relief. She'd just confessed to corporate espionage on a federal recording device. After Jenna went to bed, I called Agent Chen. We got her, I said simply. What did she say? I played back the key portions of the recording. When it finished, Agent Chen was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Moreland, your wife just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud. We have enough to arrest her right now. What happens next? We move to the next phase. We're going to need you to get more specific information. Dates, amounts, names of the city officials involved. Can you handle that? I looked up at the ceiling, knowing Jenna was sleeping peacefully in our bed, unaware that her world was about to collapse. I can handle it. Good, because we're about to take down the biggest corruption scandal in Rivermouth's history. And your wife is right in the middle of it. As I hung up the phone, I realized there was no going back now. I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Jenna had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The game was almost over, and I was going to win. 2 weeks later, everything came to a head on a rainy Thursday evening that I'll remember for the rest of my life. I was at the print shop finishing up a rush order for the Chamber of Commerce when Agent Chen called. We're moving tonight, she said without preamble. Federal warrants have been issued for Clay Harlan, your wife, and 3 city officials. We'll be executing them simultaneously at 8 p.m. I looked at the clock on my desk. It was 6:30. Where will you arrest Jenna? At Harlan's apartment. Our surveillance team has confirmed they're both there now, along with several boxes of documents from Rivermouth Creative. It looks like they were planning to destroy evidence. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. After weeks of playing the oblivious husband, after days of wearing a wire and pretending everything was normal, it was finally over. I called Frank, who arrived at the shop 20 minutes later with a bottle of whiskey and 2 paper cups. Figured you might need this, he said, pouring 2 generous shots. I don't know how I feel, I admitted. Relieved, angry, sad, all at the same time. That's normal. You're about to watch your wife get arrested for federal crimes. There's no handbook for how to handle that. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain against the shop's windows. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone rang. It's done, Agent Chen said. Both Harlan and your wife are in custody. The evidence we found in Harlan's apartment is extensive. Financial records, copies of sealed bids, correspondence with city officials. Your wife's cooperation was invaluable. What happens now? Arraignments tomorrow morning. Given the evidence we have, I expect both of them to be denied bail. This is going to be front-page news, Mr. Moreland. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my children who are spending the night at my sister's house. Tomorrow, they'd wake up to find their mother's arrest splashed across every newspaper in Maine. I'm prepared. Good. We'll need you to come in tomorrow to give a formal statement. And Mr. Moreland, you did the right thing. After I hung up, Frank poured another round of whiskey. So what's next for you? I honestly don't know. Divorce proceedings, custody battles, trying to explain to my kids why their mother is in federal prison. The kids will understand eventually. Kids are resilient. I hope so. We were interrupted by a knock on the shop's front door. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see Maya, Jenna's sister, looking frantic and soaked. I opened the door and she rushed inside, her eyes wild with panic. Alec, thank God you're here. Have you heard from Jenna? The FBI came to my house asking questions and I can't reach her anywhere. I looked at Frank, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Maya, you should sit down. Why? What's happened? Where is she? Jenna's been arrested. Maya's face went white. Arrested for what? Federal fraud charges. She and Clay Harlan were running a bid rigging scheme using inside information from city contracts. That's impossible. Jenna wouldn't. She's not. Maya sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Oh God, she asked me to do things. Small things like making copies of documents, keeping files in my office. I thought it was just normal business. What kind of documents? Bid specifications, contract requirements. She said Clay needed them for strategic planning. Maya looked up at me with horror in her eyes. I helped them, didn't I? I'm an accessory. Frank spoke up for the first time. Maya, you need to call a lawyer right now. If the FBI comes asking questions, don't say anything without legal representation. After Maya left, Frank and I finished the bottle of whiskey in silence. When we finally locked up the shop and went our separate ways, I felt like I was sleepwalking through someone else's life. I drove home to the empty house where I'd lived with Jenna for 8 years. Her coffee cup was still in the sink from that morning, her jacket hanging on the chair where she'd left it. In a few hours, federal agents would arrive with a search warrant to go through our home, looking for more evidence of her crimes. I walked through the house, looking at the life we'd built together. Family photos on the mantle, her books on the shelves, the bedroom where we'd made love and shared our dreams and planned our future. All of it felt like artifacts from an archaeological dig, remnants of a civilization that no longer existed. In her jewelry box, I found the credit card statement that had started this whole nightmare. Ocean View Beach House Rentals. $2,000 for romantic weekends with her lover while I stayed home with the kids. I sat on the edge of our bed and called my sister to check on the children. "They're fine," she said, sleeping peacefully, "but Alec, it's all over the news. Major corruption scandal rocks Rivermouth. They're showing pictures of Jenna being led away in handcuffs. I know. The kids are going to have questions. I'll handle it. Do you want me to keep them for a few more days? Give you time to figure things out?" "Yeah, that would be good." After I hung up, I poured myself one more drink and sat in the living room, staring at the family portrait we'd had taken last Christmas. Jenna looked radiant in her red dress, her arms around our children, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. 3 months later, she was sleeping with her boss and helping him defraud the city. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You bastard, you set her up." Maya, probably, or maybe one of Jenna's other friends from work. Word would spread quickly in a town like Rivermouth. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Alec Moreland had helped the FBI bring down his own wife. I turned off my phone and went upstairs to bed. For the first time in months, I had the whole bed to myself. No more wondering where Jenna really was. No more pretending I didn't notice the smell of another man's cologne on her clothes. No more lying awake listening to her whisper into her phone in the bathroom. As I drifted off to sleep, I remembered that moment 2 weeks ago when Jenna had asked me why I was being so cold. "Practicing for when you're gone," I told her. Well, she was gone now, and I wasn't practicing anymore. The next morning brought a media circus that turned my quiet neighborhood into a war zone. News vans lined the street, reporters camped out on my lawn, and helicopters circled overhead like vultures. I made coffee and watched through the kitchen window as strangers trampled Jenna's flower garden while setting up camera equipment. My phone had been ringing constantly since 6 a.m., but I'd turned off the ringer and let everything go to voicemail. The few messages I listened to were a mix of reporters wanting interviews, friends expressing shock and support, and angry calls from Jenna's family accusing me of betraying her. At 9 o'clock, Agent Chen called. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better. My yard looks like a carnival." "It'll die down in a few days. Right now, you're the story, but once the arraignments happen and the legal process starts, the media will move on." "What can you tell me about the charges?" "Your wife and Harlan are each facing 12 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering. If convicted on all counts, they're looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison." The number hit me like a physical blow. 30 years. Jenna would be in her 70s when she got out. "The evidence is overwhelming," Agent Chen continued. "Financial records, recorded conversations, testimony from city officials who are cooperating to reduce their own sentences. Your recordings were crucial, but they're just part of a much larger case." "What about bail?" "Denied for both of them. The judge considered them flight risks given the amount of money involved and the sophistication of the scheme." After the call, I sat in my kitchen staring at the chaos outside my window. This was my life now. The husband who'd betrayed his wife, the man who'd chosen justice over loyalty, the father who'd destroyed his children's family to expose the truth. Frank showed up around noon, somehow managing to slip past the reporters by coming through my backyard. "You look like heck," he said, helping himself to coffee. "Feel worse than I look." "Any word from the kids?" "I talked to them this morning. They don't understand why they can't come home, why there are people with cameras outside their house. How do you explain to a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old that their mother is a criminal? You tell them the truth, age appropriately. Kids can handle more than we think." Frank was right, but that didn't make the conversation any easier. I'd driven to my sister's house that afternoon, sat my children down in her living room, and tried to explain why their world had just collapsed. "Mom made some bad choices at work," I'd said, holding both of them close. "She broke some rules, and now she has to face the consequences." "Is she going to jail?" my daughter Emma had asked. "Yes, sweetheart, for a long time." "Did you know she was doing bad things?" my son Michael wanted to know. That was the question I'd been dreading. How do you tell your children that you'd spent weeks secretly recording their mother, gathering evidence that would send her to prison? I found out she was making bad choices, and I had to decide what to do about it. I chose to do what I thought was right. Are you getting divorced? Emma asked. Yes. They'd cried then, both of them, and I'd held them while they grieved for the family that no longer existed. Later, after they'd gone to bed, my sister had asked the question I'd been asking myself. Do you think you did the right thing? I think I did the only thing I could live with. Even knowing it would destroy your family? Jenna destroyed our family the moment she started cheating and stealing. I just made sure there were consequences. The arraignment was a media spectacle. I sat in the back of the federal courthouse, watching as Jenna and Clay were led into the courtroom in orange jumpsuits and shackles. Jenna looked haggard and defeated, a far cry from the confident woman who'd kissed her lover on the Marina Pier just a few weeks earlier. She spotted me in the gallery, and our eyes met for a moment. The look she gave me was pure hatred, as if I were the one who'd betrayed our marriage vows instead of her. The charges were read aloud, a litany of fraud, conspiracy, and corruption that painted a picture of a criminal enterprise that had stolen millions of dollars from the city over the course of 2 years. When the prosecutor detailed the evidence against them, including extensive recordings provided by a cooperating witness, Jenna's shoulders sagged in defeat. Both defendants pleaded not guilty, but their lawyers looked like men who knew they were fighting a losing battle. The judge set a trial date for 6 months away and remanded both defendants to federal custody without bail. As the marshals led Jenna away, she looked back at me one more time. This time, instead of hatred, I saw something that might have been regret. Or maybe I was just projecting what I wanted to see. Outside the courthouse, I was surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Mr. Moreland, how does it feel to know your testimony will send your wife to prison? Did you know about the affair before you contacted the FBI? Are you seeking custody of your children? I pushed through the crowd without answering, Frank running interference beside me. We made it to his car and drove away in silence. You okay? He asked finally. Asked me in 20 years. That evening, I sat in my empty house with a bottle of bourbon and tried to figure out what came next. The media attention would fade, the trial would proceed, and eventually Jenna would be sentenced to decades in federal prison. I'd get divorced, win custody of the kids, and try to rebuild some kind of normal life. But I'd always be the man who'd betrayed his wife, who'd chosen revenge over forgiveness, who'd destroyed his family in the name of justice. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. You son of a witch, a woman's voice said. Maya, she loved you. Despite everything, she still loved you, and you destroyed her. She destroyed herself. She made mistakes, but she didn't deserve this. Federal prison, Alec? You couldn't just divorce her like a normal person? She wasn't cheating like a normal person. She was committing federal crimes. And you were the perfect husband? Never made a mistake? Never hurt anyone? The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I hadn't been a perfect husband. I'd been distant, focused on work. Maybe not as attentive to Jenna's needs as I should have been. But I'd never cheated, never lied, never stolen millions of dollars from taxpayers. I never betrayed my family, I said quietly. You betrayed her when you went to the FBI instead of trying to work things out. There was nothing to work out, Maya. She was stealing money and sleeping with her boss. What was I supposed to do, pretend it wasn't happening? You were supposed to love her enough to try. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, wondering if Maya was right. Had I given up too easily? Should I have confronted Jenna directly, tried to get her to stop, given her a chance to make things right? But then I remembered the casual way she'd lied to me about working late. The contempt in her voice when she'd talked about leveling the playing field with their competitors. The passionate kiss she'd shared with Clay while I watched from the shadows. No. Jenna had made her choices and I'd made mine. She'd chosen betrayal and crime, and I'd chosen justice and truth. I poured another bourbon and raised it in a toast to the empty house. Practicing for when you're gone, I said aloud. Well, you're gone now, and I'm not practicing anymore. Outside, the last of the news vans was pulling away, leaving my neighborhood quiet for the first time in days. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of rebuilding my life. I'd file for divorce, fight for custody of my children, and try to explain to them why their father had chosen to destroy their family in order to save it. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest. And after months of living with lies and deception, honesty felt like a luxury I could finally afford. The game was over. And despite everything I'd lost, I'd won.